It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that made the whole street seem asleep. The sun was bright, the air still, and a few birds sang somewhere in the distance. A black sedan rolled slowly into the neighborhood, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. The driver, a tall man in his early 30s, looked calm and tired. He had just come from work, still in his blue shirt and gray slacks, a small box of tools sitting on the passenger seat beside him. He wasn't there for anything unusual, just to help his mother fix her porch light that had been flickering for weeks. He pulled up in front of a small cream-colored house with a trimmed yard and a few potted plants near the steps. He smiled to himself as he saw the curtains move slightly. His mother was probably watching from inside, as she always did when he came by. He got out of the car, stretched a little, and grabbed the toolbox. The day was calm. He had no idea that in less than 15 minutes that peace would be gone. Across the street, a woman watering her flowers looked up and frowned. She didn't recognize the car or the man. She thought about the news she had seen that morning about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods. Her heart picked up speed. Instead of walking over to say hello or ask who he was, she walked inside her house and made a call. It was just a short call, a few sentences, but it set everything in motion. The man, unaware of any of this, walked up the steps to his mother's porch. He placed the toolbox down and knocked on the door lightly before using his spare key. His mother wasn't home. She had gone to the grocery store earlier. He stepped inside, calling out her name just in case. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He smiled again, feeling that familiar warmth of being back home. He took a screwdriver from the box and started working on the porch light. Down the street, a police car slowed down. Officer Ryan, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a firm jaw, had just gotten a report about a possible suspicious person. He sighed, adjusting his radio. He'd done this kind of call 100 times before. Most turned out to be nothing. But still, protocol was protocol. He turned the car onto the quiet street and spotted the black sedan immediately. His eyes narrowed. He didn't know the man standing on the porch, and something in his gut told him to stay alert. He parked near the curb, stepping out with one hand resting on his holster. The neighborhood was quiet. Only the sound of a lawnmower could be heard in the distance. The man on the porch noticed the police car but didn't think much of it. He continued tightening a loose screw, humming softly to himself. Then he heard a voice, sharp, commanding, "Hey, step away from the door." He froze, looking up in confusion. The officer stood by his car, one hand near his weapon, eyes focused and cautious. The man blinked, unsure what was happening. "Sorry?" he asked, setting the screwdriver down slowly. "Step away from the house," the officer repeated, louder this time. The tone made his stomach tighten. He raised his hand slightly, trying to show he meant no harm. "This is my mother's house," he said calmly. "I'm just fixing the light. She lives here." The officer didn't move closer. He stayed where he was, eyes darting between the man and the car parked nearby. Something about the situation made him tense. He'd been trained to act fast, to never let his guard down. But that training often made him see danger where there wasn't any. The man stood still, his heart starting to beat faster. He could feel the weight of the officer's stare. It wasn't the first time he had felt it. That quiet judgment, that invisible question of whether he belonged. He tried to stay calm, remembering what his mother always told him. "Stay polite, stay still, don't argue." "Sir, I can show you ID if you want," he said, keeping his hands up. "My mom's at the store. She should be back soon." The officer didn't answer right away. He scanned the front of the house, the car, the street. The woman who had made the call was now peeking through her curtains, heart-pounding but curious. To her, she had done the right thing. To him, she had started a nightmare he didn't deserve. The officer finally said, "Just stay where you are." He reached for his radio, murmuring something into it. The man swallowed hard, feeling the air grow heavier. He could almost hear the seconds ticking by. A dog barked somewhere far away, and it made him flinch. He thought about calling his mother, but he didn't want to move his hands. He thought about explaining again, louder this time, but he didn't want to make the officer nervous. So he stood there, quiet, waiting, hoping that this would end soon. Inside the house, the old clock on the wall ticked steadily. He remembered helping his mom move into this place 5 years ago, painting the walls, fixing the cabinets, building the porch where he was now standing. Every inch of it was familiar, every sound comforting until now. Now it felt like a stranger's home. The officer took a few cautious steps forward, his hand still hovering near his holster. "You said your mother lives here?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Her name is Mrs. Walker, you can check. Do you have proof of that?" "My ID is in my pocket." "Can I reach for it?" The officer hesitated, his eyes narrowing. He gave a small nod, keeping his other hand steady on his sidearm. The man slowly reached into his back pocket, his fingers trembling slightly. He pulled out his wallet and held it up, opening it so the officer could see without getting closer. "That's me," he said softly. "Driver's license. Same last name as my mom. You can call her if you want." The officer looked at the ID, still uncertain. His radio crackled again, another officer confirming they were on the way. The first officer sighed, feeling the pressure building. Part of him wanted to believe this man, but another part, the part shaped by years of being told to expect the worst, kept his guard high. The man noticed the hesitation and felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't angry, just tired of having to prove himself again and again. He kept his voice steady. "I live in the next town over. I come here every week to help my mom out. Please, just check with her." The sound of another police car approaching filled the air. He turned his head slightly, seeing the flashing lights coming around the corner. Neighbors began stepping out onto their porches, whispering, watching. Some took out their phones, holding them up quietly. He wanted to disappear. He didn't want to be the center of this unwanted scene. Didn't want to be another story people whispered about. He just wanted to finish fixing the light and go home. The second police car stopped behind the first. A younger officer got out, looking between the two men. The first officer said something to him quietly, and the younger one nodded. The man could see a flicker of recognition in the young officer's face, like he had seen him somewhere before. "Hey, wait," the younger officer said, stepping closer. "You live here? With Mrs. Walker?" "Yes," the man replied quickly, a mix of relief and fear in his voice. "She's my mother." The younger officer nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I remember you. We went to the same high school. You played basketball, right?" The man nodded, almost laughing in disbelief. "Yeah, that was a long time ago." The older officer blinked, realizing things might not be what they seemed. He lowered his hand slightly, glancing between the two of them. The younger officer turned to him and said quietly, "It's okay, he's telling the truth." The tension began to ease, but it still hung heavy in the air. The first officer exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping a little. He looked at the man, guilt starting to creep in, though he didn't say anything yet. "I told you," the man said softly. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." The older officer nodded slightly, still uneasy. "Yeah, I see that now." The moment passed slowly, like a storm fading after heavy rain. The street was quiet again, but not peaceful. Something had shifted, something that couldn't easily be undone. The man looked at his half-fixed light and then at the officers, wondering how a simple act of kindness for his mother had turned into this. The younger officer gave a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry for the mix-up," he said quietly. "Someone called it in. Probably a misunderstanding." "Yeah," the man said, "a misunderstanding." He bent down to pick up his screwdriver, his hand still shaking a little. The older officer watched him for a moment, then turned away, heading back to his car. The man went back to fixing the light, though the calm was gone now. Every sound, every movement felt sharper. When his mother's car finally pulled into the driveway a few minutes later, she stepped out with a bag of groceries and a smile that faded as soon as she saw the police cars. She hurried up the steps, her eyes full of worry. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing, Mom," he said quietly. "Just a mix-up." But inside, both he and the officer knew it wasn't just a mix-up. It was something heavier, something that would linger long after the police cars drove away. The next few minutes felt like hours. The man stood by the porch, watching the police cars drive away slowly. His mother was still holding the grocery bag in her hands, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. She didn't say much at first. She just looked at her son, then at the street, then back at him. The silence between them was heavy. He finally spoke. "I was just fixing the light, Mom, that's all." She nodded slowly, setting the bag down. I know. I'm just glad you're okay." Her voice trembled a little, even though she was trying to sound calm. She reached out and touched his arm. "What happened?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Someone must have called the cops." Said I looked suspicious or something. He tried to keep his voice steady, but there was a small crack in it. They thought I was breaking in. His mother's face fell. She looked at the screwdriver in his hand, the half-fixed porch light, and then back at him. They thought you were breaking into your own house. Yeah, he said softly. They didn't even let me explain at first. She shook her head in disbelief, blinking hard as if trying to push away tears. I've lived here for 15 years. Everyone on this street knows me. I can't believe someone would call the police like that. He didn't answer. He just went back to finishing the light, turning the last screw with slow, careful movements. The screwdriver slipped once because his hands were still trembling. He didn't want his mother to see how shaken he really was. The light finally flickered on, glowing softly against the early evening sky. He stared at it for a long moment, almost as if the small bulb was the only steady thing left in that moment. Inside the police car parked 2 blocks away, Officer Ryan sat in silence. His partner had gone to check in with dispatch, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The radio buzzed quietly, but he barely heard it. His hands rested on the steering wheel, and he could still feel the tension in his chest. He replayed the scene, over and over. The man's face, the fear in his voice, the mother running out of the car with groceries. He told himself he had followed protocol, that he hadn't done anything wrong. But something deep inside him said otherwise. He turned off the engine and sat back, staring out the window. The neighborhood looked so peaceful now, but all he could see was the look in the man's eyes when he said, "I wasn't doing anything wrong." It was a look that stayed with him, a look of disappointment, not anger, that hurt more than shouting ever could. Back at the house, the man and his mother went inside. She poured him a glass of water and made him sit at the kitchen table. The old wooden chairs creaked under them. For a while, neither spoke. The air felt thick with things they both wanted to say but didn't know how to. Finally, she broke the silence. "You shouldn't have to go through things like this," she said quietly. "Not here. Not when you're just trying to help." He nodded, staring into the glass of water. "I know. But it keeps happening, doesn't it? People see me, and they assume the worst." She reached across the table, taking his hand gently. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let this make you bitter." He smiled faintly. "I'll try not to." Outside, the sky was turning orange and pink as the sun dipped lower. The street was calm again. The same neighbor who had made the call peeked out through her curtains once more. She saw the man and his mother sitting at the table through the window. For a moment, guilt washed over her. She hadn't meant to cause trouble. She thought she was doing the right thing. But seeing them like that, she realized how wrong she might have been. That night, the man couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the officer's hand hovering near his gun. He heard the sharp command to step away. He felt that invisible line drawn between them. A line he didn't create but had to live with. He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the porch light he had fixed. It glowed softly, almost like it was keeping watch. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan sat at his desk at the station, filling out his report. He wrote the facts in simple words. Responded to a call about a suspicious individual. Situation resolved without incident. That was all. No mention of the hesitation, no mention of the fear in the man's eyes. Just another report in a stack of hundreds. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the paper. His partner walked by and said, "Long day, huh?" "Yeah," Ryan said quietly. "Long day." His partner chuckled. At least it ended without trouble. Could have gone bad fast. Ryan nodded but didn't smile. Yeah, could have. He thought about those words long after his partner left. He knew how close it had been. How one wrong move, one wrong word could have changed everything. He didn't want to admit it, but he had almost made a terrible mistake. The next morning, the man returned to his own home in the next town over. The drive felt longer than usual. He kept the radio off, letting the quiet fill the car. He thought about how quickly a normal day could turn into something heavy. He thought about his mother, how she tried to be strong for him. He promised himself he wouldn't let this moment define him. but part of him knew it would always stay somewhere in the back of his mind. At the same time, Officer Ryan woke up early, long before sunrise. He sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring at the wall. He had been a police officer for 12 years. He had seen things that would make most people lose sleep. But what happened the day before felt different. It wasn't about danger or duty. It was about something deeper, about judgment, about how easy it was to be wrong. He thought about driving back to that neighborhood, maybe talking to the man, saying something, anything, to make it right. But what could he say? "Sorry I pointed a gun at you for fixing a light?" The words sounded small compared to the weight of what happened, so he stayed home, the coffee going cold in his hand. Later that day, the man's mother received a call from a community officer, checking in to make sure everything was fine. She thanked them politely and hung up, then stood by the window looking out at the porch light again. It had become more than just a light. It was a reminder of fear, misunderstanding, but also survival. Her son had come home safe. That was what mattered most. Over the next few days, the neighborhood slowly went back to normal. Kids played outside. Mail got delivered. The woman who made the call waved politely when she saw Mrs. Walker outside, though she couldn't bring herself to say anything. The silence between them spoke louder than words. The man visited again that weekend. His mother had made his favorite meal. They sat on the porch after dinner, the light shining softly above them. For a while, neither said anything. The night air was cool and still. Then his mother spoke. "You know, I saw that officer again, the one from that day. He drove by slowly like he wanted to stop but didn't." He looked up. "Really?" She nodded. "Maybe he feels bad." He shrugged lightly. "Maybe." Then he paused, taking a deep breath. "I hope he does. Not because I want him to suffer, but because maybe next time he'll think twice before pulling that gun." His mother gave a small, sad smile. "You've always been the calm one." He chuckled softly. Not calm, just tired. They both laughed a little, the sound gentle but bittersweet. The world around them felt still, like it was holding its breath. In the distance, a dog barked, and a car drove by slowly. Everything seemed normal again, but deep down, both of them knew things had changed. Inside his home that same night, Officer Ryan sat at his dining table, scrolling through the local news on his tablet. He saw a post on social media about the incident. Someone had filmed part of it. It wasn't viral, but people were talking. Some were angry at the officer. Others defended him. He read the comments quietly, feeling his chest tighten. He closed the tablet and stared out the window. The streetlights outside glowed faintly, reminding him of the porch light he had seen. He didn't know why, but he couldn't stop thinking about it, how it had flickered when he first arrived, then shone bright when the man fixed it. Somehow that small detail stuck with him. He knew he couldn't erase what happened, but he also knew he could learn from it. For the first time in years, he thought about how his job wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about people, about trust, about the things you can't see in a report or a radio call. The man didn't know it, but that night the officer wrote something down in a small notebook he kept in his drawer. 3 simple words: listen before action. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Outside, the world was quiet again. The porch light still glowed at the edge of the street, steady and soft, like a reminder of everything that had happened, and everything that could still change. The following week moved slowly for everyone involved. The neighborhood looked the same, but something unspoken lingered in the air. The man went back to his regular work routine, trying to push the memory of that afternoon out of his mind. But it wasn't easy. Every time he passed by a police car, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper, like a reminder that safety didn't always feel equal for everyone. He kept himself busy with work, trying not to dwell on it. But at night, when the world was quiet, his mind would wander back to the moment when he heard the sharp voice behind him. He remembered standing on his mother's porch, unsure what to do, his heart pounding. He remembered the way his hands trembled when he reached for his ID. And he remembered the officer's face, tense, cautious, and confused. The memory stayed with him like a shadow he couldn't shake. His mother tried to make things feel normal again. She called him often, asked how he was doing, and made sure to sound cheerful even when she wasn't. Every time she spoke, she would find a way to mention the porch light. "It's still working perfectly," she'd say. "You fixed it just right." It was her small way of keeping something positive from that day. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan found himself more distracted than usual. At work, he still handled calls, wrote reports, and attended briefings, but his focus kept slipping. His partner noticed it. "You've been quiet lately," the partner said one afternoon while they sat in their patrol car waiting for a call. "Everything okay?" Ryan nodded, eyes on the road. "Yeah, just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness. He couldn't stop thinking about the look on that man's face. The mix of fear, calm, and quiet disappointment. He'd seen all kinds of expressions in his job: anger, panic, guilt, defiance. But that look had cut deeper than any of them. It made him question himself in a way he never had before. That weekend, Ryan drove back to the same neighborhood. He wasn't on duty. He told himself he just wanted to see the area again, maybe to remind himself that things were fine. But when he parked a few houses down and saw the porch light glowing, his chest tightened. He saw the same black car parked in the driveway, the same trimmed lawn, the same sense of calm that had been shattered that day. He thought about walking up to the door, about saying something, anything. But he didn't. He sat in the car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, then started the engine again and drove away. He wasn't sure what stopped him: fear, guilt, or the worry that his words wouldn't make a difference. The man, meanwhile, was inside the house that very same evening. His mother had invited him over for dinner again. They laughed about old stories, cooked together, and tried to focus on ordinary things. But when he stepped outside to take out the trash, he noticed a familiar car parked briefly at the corner of the street. It didn't stay long, but it was enough for him to recognize it. The same police car from that day. He stood there quietly, watching as it drove off. He didn't know what to think. Was the officer patrolling, or was it something else? That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe the officer was just doing his job, or maybe he felt something too. Either way, the thought lingered. A few days later, the man's mother received a letter in the mail. It was short, written in careful handwriting. It read, "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened that afternoon. I didn't handle things the way I should have. I was wrong to assume before I understood. I'm grateful nothing worse happened, but I know that doesn't make it right. I hope your son is okay. Officer Ryan." She read the note twice, then showed it to her son when he visited that weekend. He read it quietly, not sure how to react. It wasn't a long letter, but it carried weight. He could almost feel the officer's hesitation in the words, the guilt that had probably built up for days. He folded the paper and set it on the table. "At least he thought about it," his mother said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "That's something." But deep down he didn't know what to feel. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily. It wasn't about anger. It was about trust. And trust once shaken takes time to rebuild. That evening he took a walk down the street. The air was cool and the sky was painted in shades of gold and pink. He passed the same neighbor who had made the call. She was tending to her flowers again, just like that day. When she saw him, she froze for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. He hesitated, then nodded politely. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but didn't. He kept walking, and for a brief moment they both understood that some things were easier left unsaid. At the same time, across town, Ryan sat in his car again, this time outside the police station. He had just finished another long shift, but instead of heading home, he stayed there thinking. He had written that letter after talking to his wife, who told him, "You can't undo what happened, but you can show you've learned from it." Those words stuck with him. He didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted to take responsibility. For years, he had thought of his job as being about control and safety, but now he saw that it was also about understanding, about seeing the person behind the situation. He realized how quick assumptions could build walls that didn't need to exist. The man, meanwhile, started volunteering at a local youth center that month. He wanted to focus on something positive, something that reminded him of community. He helped teach computer basics to teenagers, some of whom had their own stories about being misunderstood. When they asked him why he volunteered, he smiled and said, "Because everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not what someone assumes." The experience helped him heal, slowly. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave him a sense of purpose beyond it. A few weeks later, their paths crossed again by chance. The man was driving home when he saw flashing lights up ahead. A small fender bender had occurred near an intersection. As he slowed down, he recognized one of the officers directing traffic. It was Ryan. Their eyes met briefly. It was a quiet, uncertain moment. Ryan gave a small nod. The man hesitated, then nodded back. No words were spoken. None were needed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. When he got home, his mother asked how his day was. He smiled faintly and said, "Better than some." Later that night, Ryan wrote another note, not to send this time, but to remind himself of what he was learning. "Every choice matters," he wrote, "even the ones we regret." He kept that note in his locker at the station. The man sat on his porch that same evening, the repaired light shining softly above him. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the misunderstanding, the small steps toward peace. The world didn't change overnight, but maybe, he thought, change didn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it started in quiet moments with people deciding to see each other differently. The next morning, as the sun rose, he visited his mother again. She greeted him with a warm smile and a hug. They stood outside looking at the porch light that still glowed faintly even in daylight. "You know," she said, "that light never flickered again after you fixed it." He smiled. "Good, maybe it's a sign." She looked at him curiously. "A sign of what?" He thought for a moment, then said, "That even when something breaks, it can still be fixed. It just takes time and patience." His mother smiled softly, her eyes bright. "You've always had both." He laughed lightly. "Guess I learned from you." And for the first time in a while, the air around them felt calm again. The street was quiet, the light steady, and for a brief moment everything felt exactly as it should. A few months passed, and life slowly began to move forward. The man had settled into a steady rhythm again, dividing his time between work, helping at the youth center, and visiting his mother on weekends. The memory of that afternoon still lived somewhere in the back of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. It had become something he carried quietly, a reminder of how quickly life could shift and how fragile peace could be. The neighborhood had changed too. People waved more often now, even if only out of guilt or awareness. The woman who had made the call still avoided conversation, but she always left small gestures, a wave from her garden, a nod when she passed by. The man noticed, and though he didn't respond much, he appreciated that effort. Sometimes change didn't come with words. Sometimes it came in silence. At the youth center, the kids looked up to him. They listened to his advice, laughed at his stories, and shared their own struggles. He never told them about that day directly, but his lessons carried pieces of it, about patience, understanding, and how easy it is for people to judge what they don't know. One boy who had been getting into trouble at school told him one day, "You're different. You don't talk down to us." He smiled and said, "That's because I know what it's like to be misunderstood." At the same time, Officer Ryan was also changing in quiet ways. He had started attending a community meeting series that his department encouraged, where officers met with local residents to talk about concerns. At first he went because it was required, but over time he began to see value in it, listening to people's stories, real people with families, fears, and dreams, gave him a perspective he hadn't had before. One evening, the department hosted an open discussion at the community center near the man's neighborhood. The flyer read, "Building bridges between police and community." Ryan saw it pinned to the bulletin board at work and hesitated before signing up to attend. Something inside him told him he needed to go. The man saw the same flyer at the youth center. He didn't plan to go at first, but one of the teenagers convinced him. "You should speak, man. You got something real to say." He thought about it for a while. Maybe it was time. Maybe speaking about it could help others understand what he couldn't explain before. The night of the meeting came. The community hall was full, residents, officers, students, even some city officials. The air buzzed with quiet tension and curiosity. Ryan sat in the back row, his hands folded on his lap, unsure what to expect. He recognized a few faces from the neighborhood but wasn't sure if he'd see the man there. Then, halfway through the session, the moderator announced an open floor discussion. People began standing one by one, sharing their experiences. Some spoke about safety. Others talked about trust. Then the man stood up. His voice was calm but steady. "I want to talk about something that happened right here a few months ago," he said. The room grew quiet. "I was at my mother's house fixing something on her porch when the police showed up. Someone thought I was breaking in." A few heads turned. Some people already knew the story. It was a misunderstanding, but it could have gone very differently. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I think about it often, about how quick we are to see danger where there isn't any. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not here to point fingers. I just want people to remember that every face you see belongs to someone's family, someone's friend. Sometimes that's all it takes to see things clearer." When he finished, there was silence for a moment, then quiet applause. He sat down, not realizing Ryan had been listening the whole time. The officer's chest tightened as he recognized the voice. When the moderator asked if any officers wanted to respond, Ryan hesitated. His heart raced. He didn't plan to speak, but before he could stop himself, he stood up. "I was the officer who responded to that call," he said quietly. The room turned toward him. "I'm the one he's talking about." A soft murmur spread through the audience. He continued, his voice calm but heavy. "That day changed me more than I can explain. I was doing my job, or at least I thought I was, but I let my judgment get ahead of my understanding. I've replayed it in my mind more times than I can count. I've learned from it, and I'm still learning." The room stayed silent, everyone watching as the two men made eye contact from across the hall. There was no anger, just a quiet understanding. The man gave a small nod and Ryan returned it. After the meeting ended, a few people came up to thank them both for speaking. Ryan stayed behind for a moment, unsure if he should approach. Then, as the crowd thinned, the man walked over to him. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said with a faint smile. Ryan nodded. Didn't expect to stand up either. They both laughed softly, the tension easing. For a few seconds there was only silence, the kind that feels more healing than awkward. Ryan finally said, "I meant what I said in that letter." "I know," the man replied, "and I meant what I said in there. We just have to keep talking, keep understanding each other. That's the only way it changes." Ryan nodded. "You're right. It's not easy, though." "It's not supposed to be," the man said, "but it's worth trying." They shook hands then, firm, genuine, not out of obligation but respect. The simple gesture carried more weight than words could. In the weeks that followed, both men found themselves thinking about that meeting often. It had been a turning point, though neither of them said it out loud. The man continued mentoring kids at the youth center, and sometimes he shared that story, not to shame anyone, but to teach that mistakes can lead to growth if people are willing to listen. Ryan, on the other hand, took steps to make changes within the department. He proposed new training sessions focused on empathy and communication, not just tactics. Some officers rolled their eyes, but others listened. Slowly, the idea began to spread. One afternoon, Ryan visited the youth center in uniform. He wasn't there for a call. He was there to help with a safety workshop for the kids. When he walked in, a few of them looked surprised. The man was standing by the computers helping a student. He looked up and smiled faintly. "Didn't think I'd see you here," the man said. Ryan smiled back. "Thought I'd do something useful for once." The kids gathered around as they started talking about safety, trust, and understanding both sides of a situation. It wasn't a lecture, it was a conversation. Ryan listened as much as he spoke, and the man watched, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this was how change really started. After the session, they stood outside together. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground. Ryan looked at the porch light shining across the street from where they stood. "That light of your mom's," he said quietly. "Still working?" The man chuckled. "Still shining," Ryan nodded slowly. "Good. Feels like it should stay that way." "Yeah," the man said softly. "It reminds me that some things can be fixed if people care enough to try." Ryan smiled, the kind of smile that came from relief rather than happiness. "I'll remember that." They said their goodbyes, and Ryan headed back to his patrol car. As he drove away, he felt something lift off his shoulders, not completely gone, but lighter than before. That evening, as the man sat with his mother on the porch again, she asked how his day went. He told her about the meeting weeks ago, about the workshop, and about seeing the same officer again. She listened quietly, her eyes soft with pride. "You did good," she said finally. "Not everyone would have handled it the way you did." He smiled. "I just did what felt right." She looked at him for a moment, then said, "You turned something painful into something meaningful. That's not easy." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at the light above them, glowing warm against the night sky. "Maybe that's the point," he said finally. "Sometimes, light only matters because of the dark it came from." His mother smiled, and together they sat quietly, the steady glow of the porch light wrapping them in a calm that had taken months to find. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace, the kind that comes from understanding, not forgetting. The weeks rolled into months, and life in the neighborhood slowly found its balance again. The man had grown closer to the kids at the youth center, helping them with schoolwork, guiding them through small troubles, and always reminding them that patience and understanding could open doors that anger never could. He didn't talk much about the day the officer pointed a gun at him anymore, but the memory had shaped how he moved through the world. It had made him quieter, more thoughtful, but also stronger. The officer had changed too. He was different now, not in a way people could see easily, but deep down. His voice was softer when he spoke to people during calls. His tone had lost its sharp edge. He had learned to listen before reacting, to ask questions before assuming. The encounter had become a turning point, though he never told many people about it. He just carried it with him, like a lesson that could never be unlearned. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the city. The rain came down heavy, washing the streets clean and leaving the air smelling fresh. The man stood by the youth center window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. A group of kids were inside, huddled around a game. Their laughter filled the room, and it made him smile. He loved this place. It reminded him that even after something painful, good things could grow. Then, as the rain softened, one of the teenagers ran in with news. "There's been a small accident near the corner. A car hit the light pole." Everyone rushed to the window, and the man saw it. A car tilted slightly, the front bumper crushed against the pole. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and ran outside. When he reached the scene, a few people were already there. The driver's door was open, and someone was sitting inside holding their arm. The man leaned in to help, his calm voice cutting through the panic. "Hey, it's all right, you're okay. Don't move too much." The driver looked up. It was the officer. The man's breath caught for a second, surprised to see him again, but he didn't hesitate. He called out to a bystander to grab a first aid kit from the center. Rain still dripped from his jacket as he carefully checked if the officer was hurt. Ryan blinked through the rain, his face pale but steady. "Guess I wasn't watching the road close enough," he said quietly, trying to smile. "Just stay still," the man said. "Help's coming." Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. The paramedics took over, but before they closed the doors, the officer caught his gaze. "Thanks," he said simply. "You didn't have to stop," the man nodded. "Of course I did." It was a small moment, but it carried weight, a silent reminder that decency and compassion weren't something you gave based on who someone was or what they'd done before. It was something you gave because it was right. The next week, the man stopped by the station to check on him. He didn't plan to, but something told him it mattered. The officer was surprised to see him walk in, but smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd visit," he said. The man shrugged. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I will be," the officer said, adjusting the sling on his arm. "Doctor says I got lucky." "Good," the man replied. "We all need a little luck sometimes." They talked for a while, nothing deep at first, just small things. But slowly, the conversation turned to life, work, and how much things had changed since that day on the porch. Both of them realized something important, that they had grown from that moment, not in spite of it. The officer confessed that he had started mentoring new recruits differently now. "I tell them to slow down," he said, "to see the person before they see the situation. I wish someone had told me that years ago." "That's good," the man said softly. "That's how it starts, one person, one change at a time." The conversation lasted longer than either expected. When the man left, the officer felt lighter. The guilt he had carried for months wasn't gone completely, but it no longer felt unbearable. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could keep learning from it. A few days later, the youth center held its annual neighborhood barbecue. Families gathered, kids played, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. The man was busy helping set up tables when he noticed a familiar figure walking up with his arm still in a sling. The officer smiled sheepishly. "Heard there was good food here," he said. The man laughed. "You heard right. Grab a plate." People noticed the officer, and some whispered at first, uncertain how to react. But then one of the kids ran up and handed him a soda. "You're the guy from the workshop, right?" the boy asked. The officer nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The boy grinned and said, "Cool. You taught us that cops get scared too sometimes." The officer chuckled. "Yeah, that's true." The tension in the crowd eased. Slowly, people began to include him in conversations. They asked him questions, shared laughs, and even thanked him for coming. For the first time in a long while, the officer felt like he belonged somewhere outside of his uniform. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink, the man and the officer stood by the grill watching the kids play. "Didn't think I'd be welcome here," the officer admitted. "You showed up," the man said. "That's what matters." The officer nodded, looking around. "This feels different, feels..." "Right. It is," the man said quietly. "This is how it should have always been." They didn't need to say more. The moment spoke for itself. The neighborhood that once held fear and tension now felt lighter, more connected. People who had once looked at each other with suspicion now shared food and laughter. As the evening ended, the officer helped clean up, despite his arm. When it was time to go, he thanked the man again. "For everything," he said. "For stopping that day, for talking, for not giving up on me." The man shook his head. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." The officer nodded. "I'll remember that." They stood there for a moment, watching the kids chase fireflies across the field. The sound of laughter filled the air, and the porch light across the street flickered on, casting a soft glow that seemed to settle over everything. That night, when the man returned home, he sat quietly on the porch with his mother again. She asked how the day went, and he told her about the barbecue, about seeing the officer, about how different things felt now. She listened with that same patient smile. "You did good," she said. He looked at the light glowing above them. "I think we all did," he replied. Down the street, the officer drove home slowly, watching the same light fade in the distance. He felt peace for the first time in a long while, not because he had forgotten what happened, but because he had finally understood it. Understanding didn't erase mistakes, but it turned them into lessons. And for him, that was enough. The rain started again later that night, gentle and steady. It tapped against the windows like a quiet rhythm, almost like a reminder that every storm eventually passes, and what's left behind can still grow, still heal. In that small neighborhood, life went on, not perfect, not without pain, but better. Two men who started as strangers connected by a mistake had somehow managed to turn a moment of fear into something that touched everyone around them. And as the night settled in, it became clear that sometimes change doesn't come from grand gestures or loud declarations. It comes from quiet choices, from forgiveness, from simply deciding to keep showing up. The porch light stayed on that night, its soft glow spilling across the wet pavement like a promise that even in the darkest moments, light has a way of finding its way back. Months passed, and the air in the neighborhood felt different now. There was a sense of calm that hadn't been there before, a quiet kind of trust that grew slowly between people who had once looked at each other with uncertainty. The youth center had become a second home to many. The man spent most of his evenings there, teaching small lessons about life, choices, and respect. He didn't preach. He just shared experiences. The kids liked that. They could feel when someone spoke from truth rather than from a rulebook. The officer visited from time to time, too. Not as part of his duty, but as part of his change. He would stop by in the evenings, sit with the group, and talk about what it really meant to serve and protect. The kids asked him questions, and he answered honestly, never pretending to be perfect. That honesty made them listen. Slowly, the man and the officer built something that neither of them had expected. A quiet friendship born from something that could have gone terribly wrong. One afternoon, the man was fixing a basketball hoop behind the center when the officer stopped by. He brought coffee like he always did. They talked about small things at first, the weather, work, how the kids were doing. Then the officer said something that made the man pause. "You know, he said, looking toward the park. I still think about that day. I don't think I'll ever forget it. The man wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at him. I think about it too, he admitted. Not as often, but it still crosses my mind. Does it still make you angry? The officer asked. The man shook his head slowly. Not anymore. I think I made peace with it. Anger doesn't fix much. It just keeps you stuck. The officer nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. I'm still learning that part. They both smiled quietly. There was no need to say more. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. It meant they understood each other now in ways that words couldn't describe. Later that week, the youth center planned a small community night. There were going to be games, music, food, and stories. The man was in charge of organizing it, and he wanted to make it special. He invited families, friends, and even a few officers, including Ryan. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about showing what could happen when people decided to look beyond fear. When the night arrived, the center was full of life. The smell of food filled the air, kids ran around laughing, and music played softly in the background. The man watched it all with quiet pride. He saw faces that had once been distant now smiling together. Even the woman who had made the original call was there, standing awkwardly near the dessert table. He walked over and greeted her gently. Glad you came, he said. She looked surprised but smiled nervously. I almost didn't. I wasn't sure if it'd be okay. It's okay, he said. It's good that you're here. They talked for a bit, about her garden, the neighborhood, little things. He didn't bring up the past, and neither did she. Some things didn't need to be said to be understood. When she left, she thanked him softly. You're a good man, she said. He just smiled and nodded. As the evening went on, the officer arrived. The crowd greeted him warmly this time. There were no whispers, no awkward glances, just welcome smiles. He joined in the games, talked to families, and even helped serve food. When the time came for a few words to be shared, the man found himself being pushed toward the small stage by the kids. Say something. They laughed. He stood there looking at the crowd, his voice calm but filled with warmth. I just want to thank everyone for being here, he said. We've all come a long way. This place, this community, it's proof that people can change. We all make mistakes, but what matters is what we learn from them, what we do next. That's what builds trust. That's what builds peace. The audience clapped softly. The officer stood nearby, listening carefully. Then he stepped forward too. He's right, he said. We can't undo the past, but we can choose what kind of people we want to be tomorrow. I've learned that the hard way, but I'm grateful I got the chance to learn it at all. The crowd clapped again, louder this time. For the first time, the officer didn't feel like a stranger in that room. He felt like part of it. After the speeches, the man and the officer stood outside for a while, watching the lights strung across the yard. The night was calm and laughter still echoed from inside. You ever think how strange this all is? The officer asked quietly. How so? The man replied. That something so bad led to something like this. The man thought for a moment, then said, maybe that's just how life works. Sometimes the hardest moments plant the seeds for the best ones. We don't always see it right away. The officer smiled faintly. You sound like my therapist, the man laughed. Guess we've both been learning from someone. They watched as the lights flickered gently in the breeze. It felt like a symbol of everything that had changed. The neighborhood, their friendship, their understanding of the world. Weeks later, the youth center hosted another meeting with officers and residents. It wasn't tense like before. It felt like a regular conversation, like something that belonged. People shared ideas, asked questions, and talked about what else could be done to make things better. The man watched proudly as the officer led part of the discussion, speaking calmly and listening carefully. Afterward, one of the kids asked the man, Do you think things will stay like this? He smiled. Maybe not always. Life changes and people forget sometimes, but as long as even a few remember what we learned, it'll never completely disappear. The kid nodded, satisfied with that answer. That night, after everyone had gone home, the man locked up the center and walked outside. The sky was clear, stars shining bright above the quiet streets. He walked down the familiar path toward his mother's house. The porch light was still glowing, just like it always did. She was sitting there waiting for him, a blanket around her shoulders. You look tired, she said. Good tired, he replied, sitting down beside her. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the soft hum of the night. Finally, she asked, "You ever think about how far you've come since that day?" He smiled. "Every now and then. Feels like a lifetime ago." She nodded. "You turned something heavy into something beautiful." "Not everyone can do that." He looked at the light above them. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It took a lot of people deciding to try again." His mother reached out and squeezed his hand. "That's how healing works. No one does it alone." He smiled, feeling the truth in her words. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a few houses away, neighbors talking, kids playing even though it was late. Life was moving forward like it always should. As he sat there, he thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the mistakes, the lessons, the forgiveness. It had all led to this quiet peace. And maybe that was the point of it all, not to erase what happened, but to grow from it. The officer passed by once in a while on his night patrols. Every time he did, he slowed down near that porch just long enough to see the warm glow of the light and the silhouette sitting beneath it. It reminded him of how fragile moments could be, and how powerful it was when people chose understanding over anger. Years later, the story of what happened in that small neighborhood would fade from headlines and gossip, but the change it sparked, the lessons it left behind, stayed alive in the people who lived there. The kids who grew up at the youth center carried it with them. The officer who once drew his weapon carried it in his heart, and the man who had once been seen as a threat became a symbol of grace and quiet strength. The porch light stayed on through it all. Storms, seasons, and years. It never went out. Maybe that was the real message in the end. That light doesn't need to be loud to make a difference. Sometimes it just needs to keep shining, reminding everyone that peace is possible even after fear. That forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can rewrite what the future looks like. And as the night settled softly over the neighborhood once more, the man leaned back in his chair, looked up at the stars, and smiled. Somewhere inside him, he knew the journey had been worth it, because sometimes the greatest change doesn't come from power or force, it comes from understanding, one person at a time.